If you have ADHD, you have spent a significant portion of your life being told that something is wrong with you, that you can't focus, that you can't sit still, that you interrupt too much, move too much, lose things too often, act before you think. That in a world built for sustained attention and patient routine, your brain runs on a different operating system, one that was not designed for classrooms or spreadsheets or meetings that could have been emails. But here is what nobody told you, and it is something that the science has been slowly, quietly confirming for years. Your brain is not broken, it is ancient. The traits that make ADHD so difficult in the modern world, the impulsivity, the hypervigilance, the inability to sit still, the constant scanning for something new, are not flaws in the human design. They are features that were so valuable in the environment where humans spent 99% of their existence that they have persisted in the gene pool for hundreds of thousands of years, despite every pressure that should have eliminated them. Today, we are talking about what ADHD actually is, where it came from, and why the most compelling evidence suggests that people with ADHD are not broken modern humans. They are extremely well-designed ancient ones, and why that matters for every single person watching this, whether you have ADHD or not. Start with the question that evolutionary biologists have been asking for decades, because it is the question that leads to everything else. If ADHD is genuinely harmful, if it causes people to underperform, to struggle, to fail, then why hasn't evolution eliminated it? This is not a trivial question. Evolution is ruthless about removing traits that reduce survival and reproduction. If a genetic variation consistently produces individuals who are less healthy, less capable, and less likely to pass on their genes, that variation should disappear from the population over time. And yet ADHD persists at a global prevalence of between 5 and 10% of the population, depending on how you measure it. Across all cultures, all countries, all economic conditions, consistently, for as long as we have records. That is not what a harmful mutation looks like. That is what a useful one looks like. The scientific term for this is balancing selection, when a trait is maintained in a population because it offers genuine advantages in certain conditions, even if it comes with costs in others. The classic example is sickle cell anemia. The gene variant that causes the disease also provides significant protection against malaria, which is why it persists at high rates in populations from malaria endemic regions. The same logic applies here. Something about ADHD was valuable enough to ancient humans that the genetic variants associated with it are still present in 1 in 10 people today. The question is what? In 2024, researchers at the University of Pennsylvania published a study that gave scientists their clearest experimental evidence yet for why ADHD traits persisted in the human genome. The setup was simple. 457 adults were given an online task designed to simulate ancient foraging. They had 8 minutes to collect as many berries as possible from a virtual environment filled with berry bushes. The catch: every time you foraged from the same bush, it gave you fewer berries. At some point, staying with the current bush was no longer worth it. The smart move was to move on and find a new one, but every time you moved, you lost time to the transition. The optimal strategy, according to foraging theory, was to leave each bush relatively early before it was depleted and keep exploring for better options. Staying too long on a declining patch was consistently suboptimal. Here is what the researchers found. Participants who scored high on ADHD traits, impulsivity, distractibility, novelty-seeking, restlessness, consistently outperformed their neurotypical counterparts. They abandoned declining patches faster, they explored more, they collected significantly more berries overall. Their supposed weaknesses, inability to stay focused, constant urge to move on, restlessness with anything that isn't immediately rewarding, translated directly into superior foraging outcomes. As the lead researcher, Dr. David Barak, put it, if these traits were truly negative, evolution would have selected against them over time. Instead, the evidence suggests they were selected for. In an ancient environment where your survival depended on finding food across a wide and unpredictable landscape, the person who couldn't stop looking for something better was outperforming the person who methodically depleted one patch at a time. The ADHD brain, in other words, was built for exactly this, not for sitting, for searching. Here is where the evidence gets even more specific and more fascinating. There is a gene called DRD4. It codes for a receptor for dopamine, the neurotransmitter most associated with motivation, reward, and the drive to seek out new experiences. There are several versions of this gene, and one of them, called the 7R allele, is strongly associated with ADHD-like behavior. People who carry it tend toward novelty-seeking, impulsivity, risk-taking, and the kind of restless drive to keep moving that looks like a problem in a modern classroom and looks like an asset in a nomadic hunting context. In 2008, an anthropologist named Dan Eisenberg from Northwestern University went to northern Kenya to study the Arial people, a traditionally nomadic pastoralist group who had recently split into two communities. Half of them still lived as nomads, moving their herds across the landscape as their ancestors had done for centuries. The other half had settled into fixed communities 3 decades earlier. Eisenberg tested both groups for the DRD47R allele and measured their health outcomes. The results were striking. Among the nomadic Arial, men who carried the ADHD-associated gene variant were significantly better nourished than men without it. They had higher body mass index, more lean muscle mass, better overall health indicators. The ADHD gene was literally helping them survive. Among the settled Arial, the same gene, the same people, the same region, the pattern reversed completely. Men with the 7R allele were less well nourished than those without it. The ADHD gene, which was an advantage in a nomadic context, became a disadvantage the moment the environment shifted to a settled one. This is one of the most powerful demonstrations of what scientists call the mismatch theory, the idea that genetic traits evolve for one environment can become liabilities when the environment changes. The ADHD gene did not change. The world around it did, and a trait that had been an asset for hundreds of thousands of years suddenly became what we now call a disorder. Let's be specific, because the research points to at least 5 distinct traits associated with ADHD that would have been genuine, measurable survival advantages in a hunter-gatherer environment. The first is hypervigilance. In modern life, the inability to filter out background stimulation is exhausting and disruptive. In an ancient landscape filled with predators, it was a survival feature. The person whose attention was constantly being pulled by peripheral movement, sudden sounds, and environmental changes, the person who could never fully relax, was also the person who spotted the lion before anyone else did. Their restlessness was the group's early warning system. The second is impulsive decision-making. Modern environments reward careful deliberation. Ancient environments often punished it. When prey breaks from cover, you have a fraction of a second to react. When a predator charges, hesitation is death. The ADHD brain's tendency to act before fully thinking was not recklessness in a world where speed of response could mean the difference between eating and starving, or between surviving and being eaten. The third is hyperfocus. This one surprises people because ADHD is usually described as an attention deficit. But people with ADHD don't lack attention. They lack the ability to direct it at things they find boring. When something genuinely engages them, their attention locks in with an intensity that most people cannot match. For an ancient hunter tracking prey across miles of landscape for hours, that capacity for obsessive, locked-in focus on a moving target was not just useful, it was potentially the difference between a successful hunt and an empty camp. The fourth is novelty seeking, the compulsive drive to explore, to look beyond the current location, to find out what is over the next hill. This is genuinely disruptive in a world of cubicles and commutes. In a nomadic world where new territory meant new food sources, new shelter, new water, and the possibility of surviving a drought or a harsh winter, the person who could not stop exploring was doing the group an enormous service. The fifth is unpredictability. This one is almost never discussed, but may be one of the most important. A DHD behavior is, by definition, harder to predict than neurotypical behavior. Impulsive decisions, sudden changes of direction, unexpected actions. In a social context, this reads as disruptive. In a conflict context, facing a rival group or being hunted by a large predator, an individual whose next move is genuinely hard to predict is harder to trap, harder to ambush, and harder to kill. Unpredictability is a defensive advantage that requires no additional strength or speed. There is also a sixth advantage that the research is only beginning to document: creativity under constraint. When the ADHD brain cannot hyperfocus on one obvious solution, it tends to generate multiple alternative approaches simultaneously. It pattern matches across things that don't seem related. It makes connections that more methodical thinkers miss. In an ancient problem-solving context, How do we cross this river? How do we trap this animal? How do we survive this winter? A brain that generates unconventional solutions faster than everyone else was not a liability. It was the most valuable mind in the group. The ancient human with ADHD was not the one struggling to keep up. They were the scout, the hunter, the explorer, the one who spotted what nobody else saw and acted on it before the moment was gone. Here is the pivot that explains everything. For roughly 295,000 of the 300,000 years that Homo sapiens has existed, we lived as hunter-gatherers. No fixed address, no farm, no school, no 9 to 5. Movement was not optional, it was the entire strategy. You followed the food, you adapted constantly. You never did the same thing in exactly the same way 2 days in a row because the environment never presented you with exactly the same situation twice. This was the world the ADHD brain was built for. Not just compatible with, built for. The traits we now call symptoms were, in that context, features. Then, roughly 10,000 years ago, everything changed. Agriculture happened. And with agriculture came the requirements that are most directly incompatible with the ADHD neurotype. Farming requires patience. You plant a seed and wait months to see a result. There is no immediate reward. You perform the same repetitive tasks day after day, plowing, weeding, watering, with no variety, no exploration, no novelty. You stay in one place, you follow a schedule, you plan for seasons and years in advance, delaying gratification in ways that the ancient forager brain was simply not designed for. And then, several thousand years after agriculture, came the invention that truly exposed the mismatch. School, the formal classroom, takes everything that is most difficult for the ADHD brain and concentrates it into a single room. Sit still, pay attention to this one thing even though it is not immediately interesting. Do not move, do not talk, do not explore, wait your turn, follow the structure, repeat. The ADHD brain did not change when farming was invented. The DRD47R allele is the same gene it was 1 million years ago. What changed was the environment around it, from one where its features were assets to one where they became liabilities. Humans built a world optimized for patience and routine, and then diagnosed the people whose brains were optimized for exploration and speed as having a disorder. Consider what a school day looks like from an evolutionary perspective. You're asked to sit completely still for 6 to 8 hours. You must focus on topics whether they interest you or not. You must ignore everything happening outside the window. You must resist every urge to move, explore, or respond to anything except the designated content. You must plan for tests weeks away and remember assignments you were given days ago. Every single one of those requirements is directly opposed to what the ADHD brain was designed to do. Not because the ADHD brain is deficient, but because the school environment is, from an evolutionary standpoint, one of the most unnaturally static and stimulation-limited environments ever invented. It is the opposite of a savanna. It is the opposite of a hunt. It is, in the most literal sense, the worst possible environment for a brain built for ancient survival. As one researcher put it, people with ADHD are hunters living in a farmer's world. Here is the question that the research is only beginning to address, but that changes how you think about human groups entirely. In a band of 25 ancient humans, ADHD traits appear in roughly 5 to 10% of the population, consistent with modern rates. That means in any given group of 25 people, there were probably 1 or 2 individuals who were hyperactive, impulsive, constantly exploring, unable to sit still, always looking for something new. Were they a problem or were they a role? A 2025 paper proposed what researchers called the polygenic threshold model for cognitive specialization. The idea that neurodiversity in general, and ADHD specifically, was maintained in human populations, not despite being costly to some individuals, but because it was beneficial to the group. A band with mostly patient, methodical farmers in waiting and a few restless, impulsive explorers had something that a homogeneous group lacked: cognitive range. Different people genuinely good at different things, solving different problems, responding to different challenges. The restless one who couldn't stay focused in camp was also the one who found the new water source. The impulsive one who acted without thinking was also the one who reacted fast enough to save someone from the predator. The hyperactive one who couldn't sit still was also the one covering twice as much ground in the same time, finding food that the patient foragers had missed. A DHD, in this view, was not just tolerated by ancient groups, it was useful to them. perhaps necessary, a feature of the human collective that provided a kind of cognitive insurance, ensuring that not everyone in the group responded to challenges in exactly the same way. So did ADHD help ancient humans survive? The evidence says yes, not in every context, not for every individual, not without costs. But in the environment where humans spent almost all of their history, nomadic, unpredictable, rewarding exploration and speed and vigilance, the traits we now call ADHD were genuine advantages. Measurably, genetically, experimentally confirmed advantages. The 2024 study from the University of Pennsylvania showed ADHD traits producing superior foraging outcomes in controlled experiments. The 2008 Orial study in Kenya showed the ADHD-associated gene producing better health outcomes in nomadic populations and worse ones in settled populations. The evolutionary record shows the gene persisting at high rates across every human culture on Earth for hundreds of thousands of years in defiance of every pressure that should have eliminated a truly harmful trait. ADHD is not a modern invention. It is an ancient feature that outlasted its original environment. The world changed 10,000 years ago when humans invented farming. It changed again when they invented school. And the people whose brains were built for a different world, for movement and exploration and speed and novelty, found themselves sitting in classrooms being told they had a problem. They don't have a problem. They have an ancient brain in a modern world, and for most of human history, that brain was exactly what the species needed. The next time someone tells you that you can't focus, or the next time you tell yourself that, remember the berry bushes, remember the Orial nomads, remember that for 290,000 years, the person who couldn't stop looking for something better was the one keeping everyone else fed. And if you don't have ADHD, if you are one of the patient, methodical, routine, comfortable majority, remember this too. The people around you who seem like they can't stop moving, can't sit still, can't follow the script, they are not broken. Their brains are running software that once kept your entire species alive. They see things you miss. They move toward danger before you've finished assessing the risk. They find resources you've already decided aren't there. You needed them then. The evidence suggests you still do now.